Hey everyone, and welcome back. Before you watch this walkthrough, make sure that you pause the video and try the problem yourself. Even a partial attempt will make the explanation that much more useful. These videos are meant to support your problem-solving process, not replace it. Across a lot of my practice problems, I highlight different aspects of how to approach, break down, and reason through problems. So you're going to get the best benefit by watching multiple walkthroughs rather than treating any single one of my videos as a template that you can copy. With that, let's get started. Today's problem statement reads, given a ragged 2D array, let's compute and print the average value of each row. If the row is empty or does not exist, then the average will be 0. A ragged array is simply a 2D array where each row can have a different length. And this is extremely important because many students end up assuming that within a 2D array, all the rows have to have the same number of columns. But that's not actually a guarantee. This is why our logic always has to do things like check for null and use matrix at a given row dot length, not just matrix at 0 dot length. Now for this, what is it that we need to compute? Well, for each row, we're going to compute the sum of that row and then divide it by the number of elements in that row. So this means that for each row, we're going to need a fresh sum. Let's write the logic as comments first. As always, I have my main class ready to go with a pre-made test array just as it was in the sample problem. So you can see my first row has 3 elements, second has 2, third doesn't exist, and my fourth row has a single element. I'll go ahead and print out my grid. I will then do my compute averages in a function, and when that comes back with the array of averages where the index 0 will represent the average of the 0th row, index 1 in averages represents the row 1 in my grid, etc. I'll go ahead and I'll print that out right here. I think what I'll also do is just put some words here, averages, so when this prints out we can see what's happening. My print has not changed and my compute average is currently empty. So if I go ahead and I run this code, let me just compile it and then run it. It's important just to see what happened here. You'll notice that each of the grid rows did indeed print out, including null, because arrays.toString does actually take care of this without it exploding. So that all worked just fine. And then when averages was null as a whole, I was able to also say arrays.toString, and it had no trouble printing that out. So just so that we know how this works, it's important to sort of follow along there. Okay, you'll also notice then actually that within print, when it hit the null, like here, for each interarray row grid, when it hit row equals null, that was fine too. It didn't skip it, it just printed out the word null. So just like a couple little Java nuances that are important to understand. Okay, so with that, let's get those comments in there. So as we know, we're going to compute the averages for each row. So we're going to have to go over each row. So let's write a comment, loop over each row. Fantastic. And what do we want to do for each row? Well, for each row, we need to get a sum of all the elements. So this, as we know, could be broken down into 2 comments here. To get a sum of all the elements, we're going to need a sum variable. We're going to need to loop over every element in the row, and we're going to need to accumulate a summation. I think I've got some spelling errors in here. Every element. There we go. Once we've added up all the values, we've created this sum variable. At that point, we can come back out of this loop and we can calculate our average. And we can store it in our averages array before, of course, we return our average at the end. Now, you'll notice when I write this stuff out, I kind of assume a happy path. I assume that everything is going to work, all my value variables are defined, and it's okay to sort of begin your logic and coding from this like happy path place. But what's really important is that we just don't forget that there might be nuances here. There might be scenarios where we have a problem. So let's get started converting each of these into code. In order for us to loop over each row, we need that initial for loop that goes through each of the nums rows. And for ease, I'm actually going to go ahead and, well, let me pick all this up here. All this should be in here. I'm going to go ahead and make my sum variable in here, starting at 0. I'll actually make it a double, since I'm going to end up storing an average double anyway. I want to be careful about my integer division. I don't want that. I want double division later. I'm also going to go ahead and just make a row array here where I can store nums at I, like just directly. So I've got this reference now to my nums array just to make it clear that I'm working one row at a time. You don't need to do that, but it's an option. Then we're going to loop over every element for our row. So for int j is equal to 0, j is going to be less than our row's length, j plus plus. Now we can start to accumulate our summation. So simply our sum plus equals j at, row at j. There we go. Now we're accumulating our whole sum. The next thing we need to do is calculate our average value. So we can have a double average. Sum is already a double, so that's great. And we can take our row's length, and that's exactly how many elements we're going to have for that specific row. And then we can store that in our averages array. So our averages array in spot I, because it's the ith row, will be equal to that average value. Now this won't run if you hopefully are following along. Now's a great time to pause and see if you can figure out why this won't run with the example that I've already given you. There's a few different reasons why it won't run. I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to try to run it so that we can walk through the errors that we get, just so that we can like sort of debug together here. So let's go ahead and compile, because there should be no compile errors. Great. When we try to run it, we get some errors. So this right here says exception in thread main cannot store to double array because local 1 is null. So if we go and we look to see where that was happening, here's our runtime stack. We can see in our compute averages function in the main class on line 32. So let's walk ourselves over there right here. And what we see end up happening is that averages at I is null. It cannot store to our double array because our double array is null. So if we go and we look over here, we'll see that averages is indeed null. So we made a mistake here. When we look at our code, we can figure out that when we loop over each row, for each row, we're assigning this average value. So we should have number of rows in our averages array. So let's go ahead and create that here. So now we can set this to be the length of our array. That should work now by default. Okay. Let's clear this and let's try again. And once again, it probably won't run yet. Let's compile it, let's run it. And again, we're hitting another null pointer here. Here we go, different message now. Cannot read the array length because local 5 is null. Main compute average, main.java, line 25. So we come right here. And now we look and we see that the error message told us we cannot read the array length because something is null. Well, if it can't read this length because something is null, my guess is this is what's null. And if we remember back up here on line 7, we did have a null row. So if we say null.length, we absolutely are going to get a null pointer exception. So what we need to do is we need to check to make sure that the row exists. If row does not equal null, then we can go ahead and do this looping. Whoops. There we go. Now I've put this all inside of an if statement. Hopefully you're still pausing at this point and recognizing that's not going to be good enough. Because if row if row is null, I'll still have a null.length right here. So I'm going to have another problem right there. So now I'm going to need to pick this up also and put it over here. But now we have a third problem, and this one comes through in a compiler error. So just so we can see what it looks like, let me try to compile. And it tells me that average doesn't exist, and that's because I've declared it in the scope of this if statement, but I'm trying to use it out here. Well, if we think back to what the question told us, if we have a null, we should be storing a 0. So let's go ahead and set a default value here for our average, and it can be 0. And then we can go ahead and just calculate the correct average when we have a sum to calculate over inside of our if statement on line 32. Now, whether our row is null or not, we can appropriately store something in our averages array. Let's go and run this and make sure that we now have working code. We can compile with no errors, and let's run it. There we go. We can see we've got 1.123 does indeed have an average of 2.0. We know this from the sample, but also we picked very easy numbers. This was going to be 6 divided by 3 elements. So 6 divided by 3 is going to give us that 2. 4 plus 5 is 9. When we divide that, we get that 4.5. The nulls should come back as 0, as it does right here. And our 10 should be just divided by 1, leaving us with a value of 10. That's it. And now we've solved this problem. Now remember, you won't find my solution posted alongside this video. If you watch the walkthrough without first attempting the problem, stop here, close my solution, and try to write it yourself now. Post-walkthrough practice still counts. If you have questions about this problem or suggestions for future practice videos, please be sure to leave them in the comment section below. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye.